Hey everyone, welcome to the last ProMAX Tech Talk of 2019. This week we're going to be talking about LTO and Cloud, which one you should be using, how to choose a provider, and what kind of performance you can expect out of that. So guys, let's just get this started. Brian, what is LTO and what is Cloud? What is the difference between the two of them? And what
Okay,
do you use it for?
so LTO is just all the way to the beginning. LTO stands for linear tape open. The short version is this thing is magnetic tapes. We've used them forever. You buy an LTO drive, pop in a tape, and you can write, a large amount of data, a relatively large amount of data to a tape, and take that tape, put it on the shelf, and they're rated for about 40 years on the shelf in normal temperatures and normal humidity. So from an archival perspective, they are really, really nice. Cloud is any number of things, but in the context of what we're discussing, we're talking about online cloud storage providers. Amazon S3, Backblaze, Glacier. There's a million of them at this point, and Microsoft Azure, and they are, essentially collections of servers and all over the country that are replicated that you're uploading data to for data archival. It's just a different form of archive. So that's basically what we're looking at. Those are the technologies that we're discussing. There's a lot more to it than that, but that's the high level.
Absolutely. So for video editing specifically, which one of those technologies is the one people should be using right now? Because I know LTO is popular, Cloud's kind of working its way in there, but there's some technical like speed issues and stuff with that. So I don't even know where I'm going with this one. So which one should video editors be using right now? Is there a preference?
You just fish for that "what's your workflow" comment every
I know. I have to. I have used different ones and different shirts.
So Nathaniel, you want to?
Yeah, I'll chime in on this. I often refer to LTO as the cockroach of data. I hate it so much and I love it so much at the same time. It's like, how are we still using magnetic tape to back up data? At the same time, when I look at the performance of LTO, when I look at the cost of LTO, when I look at that, you can put, 10 terabytes of data on a single tape, stick it on the shelf, and it's still there in 20 years, and you didn't pay a penny more after you bought that tape. Like, there's some really compelling reasons to still use LTO, and it's almost like I always think that LTO is going to go away, and then the next generation comes out and it's like, oh man, there's 16 terabytes per tape on this one. Yeah, that still makes sense. And as soon as I think it's not going to make sense anymore, like they come out with the next version. And I've got a real prediction that a lot of video teams especially are going to start using cloud more and more. And the beautiful thing about cloud, it's like out of sight, out of mind. And there's also no limit to how much you can put on the cloud. So I can already see so many video teams like, just push it to the cloud, push it to the cloud. Suddenly it's going to be 3-4 years later, and people will realize, oh my God, we've got 500 terabytes on the cloud. We're paying $3,000-$4,000 a month for this. Well, we got to pull it off the cloud, and then it's like, oh my God, we've got to pull 500 terabytes off the cloud. Where do we even start? And
you're gonna put it on LTO.
Exactly. You're gonna pay the cloud provider, thousands and thousands of dollars to ship servers back to you with it, only to then put it on LTO or spinning disk or something. This is always the problem with video teams. Like, there's not a simple way to back up, archive, manage hundreds of terabytes of data. There's just not a simple way. And I think a lot of times, technology has gotten so advanced on the low end, and expectations, my own expectations, are crazy high, that we just think everything should work seamlessly no matter what. But there's not like a good perfect path with LTO or with cloud or with spinning disk, but you kind of got to pick your pony and work with it.
So you mentioned that there's different generations of LTO in your last comment. Brian, do you want to touch on like the difference between the generations? Which ones play with each other? Which ones you can't? Which ones are backwards compatible? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's been pretty straightforward for a long time, right up until this latest generation where they changed a few things. But in general, the ones that we still see out in the wild, you see LTO 6, you see LTO 7, you see LTO 8. We used to see more LTO 5, but that's pretty much dropping off the radar pretty consistently at this point. The big difference, obviously, is just the write speed and the amount of data that you can store on a single tape. It's nearly doubled in a lot of cases. In some cases, it's more than doubled. We went from 2.5 terabytes or 2 terabytes to a little over 6 terabytes from LTO 6 to LTO 7. And then from LTO 7 to LTO 8, we went up to about 10, 11 terabytes on a single tape. Now there's LTO compression that's involved in that and everything. That's a whole different conversation. Yeah, that's the yeah. But that's the main difference between the generations. As far as compatibility goes, the rule of thumb has always been you can, with an LTO 6 drive, you can read and write LTO, you can read and write LTO 5 and 6. You can read LTO 4, 5, and 6. So you can read back 2 generations, you can write back 1 generation. That has been true up until LTO 8. So LTO 8 can only read and write LTO 7 and LTO 8 tapes. The exception there is on the previous way of looking at it, we should have been able to read LTO 6 tapes. That's not possible in LTO 8, which is unfortunate because LTO 6 was around for a good long time and there are a ton of LTO 6 tapes out there.
Okay, so say someone has one of these older generations and they need to move all their data up to like an LTO 7 or an LTO 8. What does that process look like? What do they need to be able to make that happen?
Well,
a lot of time.
Yeah, really, that's a time and organization, because you're going to need, you need the previous generation of drive, you need the current generation of drive, and then you need a lot of space and time in between. Because you're effectively recovering data from, let's say you're going from LTO 6 to LTO 8. You can comfortably fit 4, maybe 5 LTO 6 tapes on a single LTO 8. So you're going to recover 4 or 5 LTO 6 tapes, aggregate them into a single area, and then write that to a single LTO 8 tape. It's a lot of different operations that you have to kind of keep track of. You're going to consolidate a lot, but it's not a small project.
Yeah, and there are enterprise systems out there that do that migration automatically, but these are 6-7 figure enterprise archive systems. Like most of the stuff that video teams are working with are the the ProMAXs, the ArchiWares, the Yoyadas of the world, which again for are significantly less expensive. But when it comes to things like, let's take this library of 100 LTO 6 tapes and migrate them to LTO 8, with most of the systems out there that video teams are using, that is restore and rewrite.
Yeah, and frankly, most of the time, the answer, quote unquote, to doing this is to simply maintain a legacy system with an LTO 5 drive as long as humanly possible, and cross your fingers that it's going to work when you need it. Because the cost of that project is quite significant from a man-hours perspective.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of clients that have done that over the years where like we've had servers and external devices that'll have like 2 LTOs in them, and I've had plenty of clients that'll put like an LTO 8 in one and then an LTO 6 in the other, and then you're pretty much covered. In that example, anything from LTO 4 to LTO 8, you can at least restore from. So that's not an uncommon way to do it.
Okay, so you said a project like that's going to take a lot of time, Brian. Like realistically, how many man hours would someone be dedicating to a project like that?
Well, I mean, it entirely comes down to the number of tapes that they have and how much data. I mean, recovering, if you were doing LTO 6 to LTO 8, recovering from an LTO 6 tape is around 125 megabytes a second. So, if you've got 100 terabytes worth of data, you can do the math, and that's going to be your absolute best case scenario if you are just a machine and you are on it as soon as those tapes are done. So, yeah, I mean, it's not a small endeavor. It's a sizable number of tapes.
Yeah, it's a chipper project. I mean, that's the kind of project where you spend 15 minutes a day, once a day, over the course of 3-4 months. Like, the LTO 6 to LTO 8 example, call that, 4 LTO 6s to 1 LTO 8, count on that being a week. Because it's not a man hours thing, it's a touch setting up the restore and then coming back in 8 hours.
Okay. And even with automated systems, there's enough going on there where it would be incredibly difficult to really truly automate that.
Incredibly difficult. Well, and this is one of the problems with archival storage. It's like, archives have to be perfect, because now you're getting to the point where, like, this is often an archive is often the only copy. Like, when you're working in a project, you should hopefully have some backup copies available. So it's almost like you can be a little bit more lackadaisical if there's backups. But when you're archiving, data integrity is huge. And what that means, I know a lot of customers, both ProMAX and other systems I've worked with, have been frustrated with LTO because LTO tends to flag things pretty conservatively, and throw up errors and say whoa. But it's because this is the last version of that file. This is the last before it's archived. So when LTO is a lot less forgiving than a file system with an SSD, where when things go wrong, most file systems are like, yeah, okay, let's move on. I'm sure it's fine. And you don't have that as much with LTO because it is archive storage.
Okay. So when you're looking at LTO tapes, LTO devices, is there a good, better, best for options for who to go with, or is it pretty much across the board same kind of experience you're going to get with whatever product you're using?
LTO stuff is actually strangely homogeneous in its stuff. There's really only a few places. I think there's something like maybe 2 factories in the world that actually make the tape, and it's just rebranded and repackaged based on who actually buys it. And then the drives, you've got HP and IBM drives, and I think as of LTO 8, HP is sourcing their drives from IBM, so we're pretty much all in the same boat here. They have different firmwares, and there are certain companies that deploy them a little bit differently with their own special stuff. But in general, physically, it's all coming from the same place for the most part at this point.
Okay. And before we wrap up LTO, you're dealing with customers who are actively using this stuff a lot. What kind of questions do you see come from some of our customers who are working with LTO about whether setting things up, how to recover certain things? What do you experience with people who are using it?
I think that was directed at you, Mike. Sorry.
I didn't hear James.
Sorry. Yeah.
Okay. A lot of it's workflow related, and what Nathaniel was saying, there's a lot more errors and stoppage that comes up because of the way that LTO works in general. A lot of questions on how it works and why does things not make it to tape when, if it is the last version of what should be written. There's a lot more requirements when files do get sent to tape. So there's a lot of misconceptions of, hey, I should be able to throw this straight to there and not think about it. But there's a lot more prerequisites to do before you can write to tape. So I get a lot of questions of how it should work, why does this not work versus what we think it should work like versus the reality of it actually working.
Yeah.
Okay. So what are some of those requirements that people get mixed up on?
Naming conventions. a lot of requirements on naming conventions, file space and compression, how much a tape can actually take.
Yeah, there's some interesting things that are not obvious when you're dealing with LTO. Like LTO, like, for lack of a better way to put it, LTO is entirely incompatible with like the current generation of people using it. Like it is the opposite of instant gratification. Like we are in a complete world of like M2 SSDs and super fast, like our OS boots up before we even like turn back to the computer after we push the power button, right? Like LTO, the thing I always tell people at the beginning, like in our workflow trainings, like if you've never used LTO before, just be prepared because it's going to take a little bit longer than you're willing to wait to do whatever it's doing right now. Like you just have to be patient because it's not, SSDs, we can pull data from all across the whole drive instantaneously, with an LTO tape, there's a little over half a mile of tape inside of that has to spool into your drive and get read and then uncompressed and then put, it takes time. Like, and no one is really willing or no one is expecting it to take the sheer amount of time that it really does take. So it takes time to get used to it, for like.
I feel like LTO's like always saying like, hey, slow down there, kid. Like slow down.
Yeah.
There's no rush on this. And like you almost can't be mad because it's like, do you want your data to go away?
Right.
You want it to go away? I'm gonna take your data away. Slow down. And it's frustrating as hell because like you're totally right. Like, I mean, all of us, like most of our users at this point, like hell, grew up on file systems, like where it's just like there's a folder structure and I put a file in a folder and I can search for it whenever I want and it's just going to pop up and like you don't even think about that stuff. Why wouldn't it be that? But yeah, when you take half a mile of magnetic tape and squeeze it into this little thin plastic box, it's not a file system in the way that we are used to working in it. And like even from a development standpoint, it's really interesting. Like, by and large, LTO is still the same basic physical technology from the early 90s. And it's actually like one of the few things that goes back and is still using like old school SCSI protocols. And like that shit just hasn't been updated since Clinton was in office or before that. I don't know. I don't even know. But like it's a very, this is why like I say it's like the cockroach of data management, because like that stuff is also frustrating, but then it's like, oh, I can put 12 terabytes of data on this, $60 tape, and it's just good for the next 20, 30 years. Whereas it's like you put 12 terabytes on the cloud, and it's like, that's gonna be $60 this month, and then next month, and then next month. And, suddenly, 5 years later, what's that? That's like $3,600, like $3,600 for that same data for 5 years versus like $80. And then it's like, okay, yeah, you have your place in the world, LTO.
All right. So let's switch over to cloud storage now. So there's a lot of providers out there. Brian, how do you go about choosing a cloud provider? Like, what are some things they should check off the list before you sign a contract with them?
Oh man, well, I mean, the biggest thing obviously that's going to be on everybody's mind is price, price and storage. The other thing is just availability. Like there are some providers that have, an actual time to recover even from cloud. Like if you request files, they may not be ready right away. They may have to actually pull them back and they may be ready in an hour. They may be ready in 24 hours, but that's a consideration when you're paying for cloud storage. The other side of it is sometimes if you have development efforts that are geared towards the cloud, there are reasons that you would link up with particular providers over another. But in the context of just storage, it usually just comes down to price and availability, price per terabyte and availability. Also, the other thing you have to be aware of in the price is most of the time they will not charge you to upload. They will almost always charge you to download that data again. So even though you're paying, $5 a month per terabyte or $7 a month per terabyte, that's just a custody kind of fee. If you want to actually access that data, then it might be 10 cents a gigabyte to download. That's probably a little high, but yeah.
Vinny pops out of the corner and he's like, so you want your data back, eh? And it gets ugly quick. I thought that was amazing. You guys didn't like that?
It's the Irishman this week.
I almost watched it, and then I saw it 3.5 hours, and I was like, I could back up to LTO in that.
Right, that's LTO waiting time. That's not SSD time. Perfect. Yeah,
okay, so sticking with the pricing, like why is it that they charge you for all these different functions you need to do just to hold on to your data? Like, why is it not just here's a monthly, like a, I don't know, why is their pricing structure the way it is where you have to pay to get your data back? Like, is there
money?
I mean, I think that's just a function of cloud providers trying to, one, you have to run a profitable, logical business, right? If it's not profitable and logical, then it goes away. But people want to focus on having the lowest price per terabyte for data. That's really important to people, because ultimately, if you're using cloud, for the most part right now in our world, cloud is being used for backup and archive, right? So in both of those scenarios, backup, hopefully you never have to download it because it's a backup, it's your secondary copy. So I actually personally love cloud for backup. I'm not crazy about it for archive, but I love it for backup.
Thanks for coming up the next segment.
Okay, you're welcome. But for archive, even archive, the nice thing with an archive is you can have a huge archive, but you might only access 1% of it on a yearly basis. So I would personally rather have a lower price per terabyte, but then a little penalty when I need to use it. But yeah, it's just a sales model at that point, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of the industry, cloud is maturing, but it's far from established and mature as to what it's going to be, for the next 20 years. I think a lot of it's still just, just market exploratory process. Somebody is always going to find a cheaper way to do it, and there's going to be a race to the bottom and there's going to be more features to justify the pricing, and it's going to wax and wane over the next 10, 15, 20.
But I think you also look at server and serverless architecture in cloud computing, and when you're uploading and downloading, you're actually using cloud computing resources. So it's not just a storage element of it, it's also information is being piped through servers somewhere. And when you use that architecture, that is charging whoever the company is. So like, let's say it's Backblaze. When something's being uploaded or downloaded, Backblaze is paying for the processing those servers, to somebody, whether that's Amazon or Google or whomever. So it does literally cost those cloud providers more when somebody's uploading or downloading than when data is just sitting dormant.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes a lot of sense then. That makes way more sense than.
And the other factor there too that in our space gets overlooked in large data centers, temperature and electricity, like that stuff is a huge factor. And when you're operating at the level that cloud storage operates, like it's not just laying in state. Like there's efforts, there's somebody, some nuclear fission is occurring somewhere to keep those drives spinning, and somebody's paying for that to get there, and that's going to be you at some level.
Okay, fair enough. So last thing to kind of close up cloud, why is it specifically video storage that is kind of seem to be the industry that is behind everyone else to adopt the cloud? Because like I use my phone all the time, cloud storage built into it. There's a lot of cloud storage applications that are out there and people are using them all the time. Why is it that we're now just starting to get into the cloud as for video?
It's not purely, but it's very, very largely the size of the data that we work with. I mean, we regularly have individual files that are, 100 gigabytes in some cases, but like very frequently they're 10 plus gigabytes for a lot of these movies. You get an iPhone 11, Mike can speak to it, some of the videos that come off of that are easily in the gigabytes, if not tens of gigabytes. That is, when you've got whole projects worth of that is not a small ask to move to the cloud. I mean, everybody, when you discuss internet speeds and stuff, a lot of how homes have gigabit Ethernet or gigabit internet. But, what flies under the radar is that's usually the download speed. That's not the upload speed. Businesses pay a lot of money for better upload speeds, but, in the business world, you pay a lot of money for like a 100 megabit upload speed, which is still not that fast. And getting terabytes of information up into the cloud is a lengthy ordeal. Enough.
Yeah. So like for some specifics, I'm looking at a chart which you can download at our website. I don't know where, but somewhere on our website, or email us. Whatever.
We'll put a link to it at the end of the video. So check it out. We'll put it in the description.
We're modern folk. But it's LTO versus cloud speeds, and like 2 terabytes as an example. 2 terabytes is a pretty average size project these days. If you have a full 200 megabit upload, like 100% of the time you're getting 200 megabits. It never wavers. Upload, not download, upload. Then 2 terabytes takes about 23 hours. The reality of having that kind of bandwidth, not many people have that kind of bandwidth, even at their homes. Like you're saying, Brian, you got gigabit upload or download, you might have 20 megs.
Yeah, 35 up and 1,000 down.
So for you, that 2 terabyte project would take about 3 days.
Nice.
And that's if you're not doing anything else.
Right. That's at the expense of my kids' Netflix, which means it would take more like 3 weeks. So.
Well, and then now those files are just there. Like that's not even like, if you talk about like what video editors actually want to do, well, they want to edit that, right? So that means you want to play it back. It gets very complex very quick. There's some companies that are trying to get around that, and they're doing mostly kind of clever VPN-ish hacks, remote desktop type stuff. But it's, the performance requirements and the data requirements for video are still just so massive.
Yeah. And the other side of it too is most of the people that are working with that amount of data also in the video world want to be moving fast. Like they go from one project to another, and even backing up a project for 3 days, is not a tenable answer, even if you have the ability, time, and money to do it.
I was talking to this, I will keep the clients anonymous for NDA reasons, but I was talking to this customer today, looking at my notes. They have three editors, huge team, right? 3 editors, my God. 172 terabytes of data, and that's just what they have right now. Like that doesn't cover future projects. So you talk about 172 terabytes of data, apply that to a 10 megabit upload, and you're talking about 3 years. Like it's silly kind of stuff. Nobody would do that, right? But even like, some of the cloud providers, they try to get around it, and it's clever. Like Amazon has their Snowball, Backblaze has the Fireball. They'll ship you a NAS where you upload 50, 100 terabytes, whatever, to that NAS, and then you send it to them and they put it on the cloud storage. But
none of that's free.
Yeah, one, that's not free. But two, 172 terabytes, now suddenly that's 3 rounds of doing that plus shipping. That's still going to take you a couple months.
And then, you're going to pay somewhere between $5 and $10 a terabyte per month.
Yeah. And it's like, you're going to spend $5,000 just getting 172 terabytes to the cloud. Then after that, now you're paying about $1,000 a month just for the storage. And then you want to add to it. And somebody's going to get pissed off 2 years from now when they realize you've got that $2,000 a month bill. They're like, what the hell? What? Why?
Yeah, and it's worth an intern in an LTO drive over a course of 3 years.
That's for like 200 terabytes. Like, get over it. Like, but that's why, I touched on this earlier. I love cloud for backup because it's like, it's offsite. It's a very controllable. You can say, okay, we want to back up, this 50 terabytes. This is our active space. This is backed up to cloud. We're always talking about buildings burning down for some reason in IT.
I like these meteors as well.
Meteors, that's good. Meteor.
Dinosaur.
Yeah, that was a problem.
A dinosaur riding a meteor hits your facility. You've got it backed up to cloud, and you can still access your data. And that's a much more controllable cost, because for backup, you can say, okay, it's worth $250 per month to ensure that this group of storage is always backed up. That's a calculated, controllable cost. Archive gets out of control real quick.
Well, and your risk profile on that is entirely different too. You're talking about, thousands of dollars to keep stuff that you're probably never going to access, versus a couple $100 to keep the projects that have yet to pay you in progress, which is a much, much more important factor there. So yeah, that's a big one. And the other really cool thing about cloud for backup too is, through, shameless plug, through our utilities, through other utilities, you can target specific files to backup where you don't have to back up an entire storage device, all 50 terabytes or 100 terabytes to the cloud. You could back up just your project files to the cloud daily, even. And those are the things that are changing, on an hourly basis. Raw footage comes in, it gets backed up once, unless you're doing something completely insane. Raw footage isn't gonna change. Like, you're pretty much good. You're focused on the stuff that's changing frequently. So, incremental backups on a daily basis, just collecting Premiere files, After Effects files, stuff like that. That's a much more reasonable upload time, a much more reasonable cost, and a much more reasonable, potential ROI if you need to use it. So yeah, for backup, it's hard to beat cloud.
Okay, so you guys pretty much already did the next segment, so I'm just going to ask the question just to see if there's anything else in there. So the question was going to be, when should you use LTO versus cloud? Is there anything else besides what you guys just tackled right there that you should be considering when doing that?
So I'll give you this. Here would be my ideal scenario for a small production team that has access to both LTO and cloud. When new footage comes in, you ingest like 5 terabytes from a shoot. That new footage immediately goes on to LTO, goes onto your big storage. It immediately goes on to LTO. If you have the budget to put it onto the cloud, you can start an upload to put it on the cloud. But once you get it to an LTO tape, preferably 2, you're in good shape. You then create the project, you start working on the project. Everything that's not footage should be tagged to be going to the cloud on a daily basis, if not potentially an hourly basis. The way that the cloud uploads work, it's all incremental. It's only going to upload the stuff that is changing over time. So once the initial upload is done, you're really not talking about a lot of data. But that scenario right there. Oh, and then the one last thing is when the project is done. Again, if you have the budget, you can send the whole thing to the cloud. But once the entire project is done, then it gets wrapped up on another LTO with the raw footage. So now you've got a singular point where all of that data lives, and that goes on the shelf, and you can make 1 or 2 copies of that, however you decide to do that. But that gives you the absolute most flexibility and coverage with the least amount of hassle and expenditure. Now you do have to have access to an LTO drive, and obviously a cloud provider, and you are going to pay some monthly fees for that. But that's probably the best of both worlds in most scenarios.
Okay. Yeah. And then to wrap this all up, so we've touched on a lot of different things about the hardware and the software and the workflow that go into either using LTO or cloud. So I just kind of want to wrap this all up in like one kind of statement. Like, what are the big considerations like for LTO besides obviously having the right generation tapes and a device to write the tape? Outside of that, what other hardware, software, workflow considerations should you be looking for? Like, is there anything like, hey, if you have this, you need this piece of hardware or this piece of software? Or is it pretty much just, you just need the tape and the drive and just get after it?
LTO 8, one of the things that's often overlooked in regards to like hardware and other ancillary requirements for it, it moves data at like 400 to 500 megabytes a second. That is not a small amount of bandwidth. That's going to cap out a normal SSD in most cases. So if you have a storage system that people are working from and you are writing or reading, to an LTO tape, chances are you're taking up a significant portion of your bandwidth to utilize that tape. There are some libraries where you're using more than one tape drive at the same time, and that can get, you can cap out on actual performance of a high performance system very quickly. So the big thing with LTO in general, especially the newer versions, is make sure you have the bandwidth to feed it properly, and it probably needs to live on its own OS, its own device in most cases, or at least its own dedicated system.
Okay. And then how about for the cloud? Kind of the same. It's kind of the same question as that. Is it pretty much just get a cloud provider, sign that contract? If you want to do a fireball or a snowball or something like that, go for it. Other than that, is it pretty much just hit the ground running and just get after it?
Cloud desperately wants to be like a fire and forget kind of thing, because when you forget about the cloud, they get to keep billing you for it. So just, the best thing about that is just be aware of what you're doing with that. Is that, some of the numbers Nathaniel was pointing out earlier, that can build up, quickly over time. You can spend a ridiculous amount of money on it.
Okay. Anything else from either you, Mike, or Nathaniel on that?
No, I mean, I think it's a good summary. The only thing I might add is, none of these, when you start to get into long-term data management, unless you are truly getting into the enterprise products and spending in the 6, sometimes even 7 figures, it's not going to be the perfect, simple, this just works that we're used to with most technology these days. It doesn't matter if it's LTO or cloud, or what we didn't touch on is spinning disk or SSDs. And I'll just say, a RAID array.
Blu-ray storage still a thing too.
It's true, but it's none of it is perfect. They all have their upsides and downsides.
Okay. And anything from you, Mike?
Mostly on how valuable is your data and how much are you going to really use it later on down the line, or who else is going to use it later down the line. So.
That's a really good point, because and this is where it screws up video professionals, right? Because I can literally, I'm gonna open up my my PowerPoint documents here, and I've got PowerPoint documents literally that go back to 2012 in my PowerPoint folder. That folder I can throw on a thumb drive in about 15 seconds. And it has every PowerPoint I've done for the last 7 years. And I'm used to that. And I just keep everything and I organize it the way I organize it. And that's really super simple with Word and PowerPoint and spreadsheets and all this stuff. But it's just a totally different thing. You know, when you get into how valuable is your data, well, that data is very valuable to me, but it's also very cheap to back it all up and to move it all around everywhere. But when you get into, you know, tens and hundreds of terabytes, that fundamentally shifts.
I'll give you a really good example of that. You know, I used to shoot music videos, you know, a decade ago. We used to have to write, when we started doing digital shoots with like some of the early RED cameras and P2 cameras and stuff, we had to have 3 copies on 3 different hard drives and an LTO tape before we left the set, which was an awful amount of time, because production insurance, the LTO in particular, existed solely because production insurance did not trust digital media at that time. And I think there's still a lot of requirements around that. We had to write that LTO tape where they would not insure the production at all because they considered it, you know, like if you spent $100,000 on that music video shoot, well, you know, that hard drive is basically at the end of the day worth $100 grand. So you had to have X amount of copies plus a non-digital copy as well. And that was, you know, that was my first introduction to LTO. I was like, why? It was purely an insurance thing. And that's still the case. A lot of LTO is purely CYA. So it has its place. But
all right. Interesting. So guys, as we're wrapping up this episode, we're wrapping up the year, we're wrapping up the decade. Is there anything you guys are excited for heading into 2020 related to whether ProMAX, video editing, or industry? Anything you're looking forward to? We'll start with you, Nathaniel. I can see the grin.
Data deduplication.
All right, Brian, how about you? It seems like you're in the same boat.
yes,
Mike, how about you?
exactly what I wanted to say.
Sorry.
All right, guys. Well, thanks everyone for joining us for the final episode of 2019, end of the decade. We'll see you next year with a lot more new topics coming up. If you're not already following us, follow our social media accounts below, subscribe to our channel, and we'll look forward to seeing you next year. Have a great one.
Thanks, guys.
Happy holidays.